Priest Ba Moreau is 38 and has been a priest for approximately 15 years. Born in Dijon, my mission brought me to Lyon, where I'm parish priest at Saint Benoit. I witnessed several miracles. I heard confessions that broke me. I have seen dying people, grieving mothers, and youngsters who smiled. What to do when your chest becomes a desert isn't taught at seminary. Desert, yes. I say this without pride or rebellion. I say it modestly. Sometimes even God's servants lose themselves. My once bright faith now flickered like a flame crushed by the wind. I kept celebrating Mass, preparing sacraments, and watching the community. There was something lacking which I couldn't name. There were no secret sins or scandals, just a thick, chilly quiet between my prayers, between the Credo and the Our Father, and in the nights I lingered in front of the tabernacle waiting to hear something. Sky seemed silent. Is God tired of me? I corrected myself. Thibaut, you strayed. In this state, more survivor than priest, I learned of the pilgrim image of Our Lady of Lourdes visiting our parish. The Archdiocese had planned a tour of the region's major churches, ending in Saint Benoit. The bishop called me Father Thibaut. A blessing for your church. I smiled. I organized the choir, checked the vestments, and lit each candle by hand. The people were enthusiastic. The ladies of the apostolate took care of the F. The night before Mass I didn't sleep much. I got up before 6 a.m., my heart racing. I tried to pray but no words came out. I got dressed slowly. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and said to myself, you just have to drive. She will do the rest. And perhaps that was all I had left to do. Drive without feeling, like Peter walking on water despite his fear, like Thomas touching the wounds without understanding, like a son returning home without knowing if he will be welcomed. That Sunday morning, clouds danced in the sky above Lyon. The church was magnificent, packed with hundreds of worshippers, white flowers in every corner. The aroma of incense rose gently, almost like an invisible prayer. And on the side altar, there she was, the statue of the Virgin of Lourdes, so simple, so serene, so filled with a presence that unsettled me. It was the first time in a long time that I felt something like warmth. Not physical, but something in my chest, like a warm breeze blowing inside my emptiness. She is here, I thought. And my soul, even though it was parched, replied silently, I know. I didn't know yet that in the middle of that Mass, in front of everyone, I was about to stumble. I didn't yet know that by spilling the wine at the feet of the Virgin, it wouldn't just be wine that would flow, but all the hardness that lived inside me. I got up early that Sunday. The sky was still tinged with dark blue when I put on my cassock and walked down to the church. The streets of Lyon were silent, as if the whole city were holding its breath out of respect for what was about to happen. The solemn Mass in honor of the Virgin Mary was to be celebrated at 10 a.m., but at 5 a.m. I was already there, lighting the first candles. I asked to be left alone for a moment. The sacristan understood. The assistants waited outside. I wanted a moment with her, with the image, with the mother. The statue of Our Lady of Lourdes, brought especially for the pilgrimage, was placed to the left of the altar, raised on a white marble pedestal covered with lilies and roses. Her eyes, slightly lowered, seemed to be looking not only at the sanctuary, but also inside me. I approached, knelt down, and unable to contain what I was feeling, whispered, I don't know what I'm doing here, Mom. My voice echoed among the empty pews. The incense from the previous day still lingered in the air, as if waiting for the fulfillment of something we couldn't name. I've lost something, I continued, almost as if confessing. I've lost the flame, the courage, the faith that made my heart beat. I keep saying amen, but sometimes, Mom, I don't feel anything anymore. I closed my eyes. I wanted to cry, but even that wouldn't come. And then I heard, or thought I heard, a phrase inside me, as if a voice without sound was saying, even when you don't feel me, I'm here. A slight shiver ran through my arms. I slowly got up. I knew that in a few minutes, the church would be full, and everyone would be waiting to see a strong, pious, centered priest. Not a man struggling with his soul. The first ladies arrived early, with their white veils and rosaries clasped between their fingers. The young people in the choir took their places. The ushers handed out programs. The smell of flowers was intense, and sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, coloring the floor with shades of red, blue, and gold. It was beautiful. But inside me the weight remained. How could I celebrate this Mass with such a weary heart? How could I speak of hope when I myself struggled to feel God's presence within me? Despite everything, I followed the ritual. I prepared the altar, separated the sacred vessels, and placed the bread and wine on the credence table. The golden chalice was clean and shiny, as if waiting for something extraordinary. It was the same chalice I had used since my ordination, and in a way it knew my hands better than I did. I put on the white chasuble embroidered with gold thread and adjusted the stole. And before leaving the sacristy, I looked at myself in the mirror. A man, a priest, an exhausted son, seeking the way back to his mother's arms. "Mom," I whispered. "If the Lord allows it, use my weakness to do something because I have no strength left." My body automatically recognized time when the bells rung. The procession began. Altar boys, clergy, readers, and me last, holding the gospel book against my chest. The church was full. People were leaning against the walls, and the doors were open outdoors. Many known faces and newcomers were there. Many came to see the Virgin Mary statue. But I wanted more. Feeling her alive was my goal. When I neared the altar, I gazed at the image and swear it felt like her eyes were following me. The Mass began, and my voice was solid but my heart was elsewhere. While reading, singing, and preaching, I felt a silent longing for something I couldn't describe. Everything was okay until the Eucharistic rite. When I grabbed the chalice and stood up, we had reached the most hallowed section of Mass, Eucharistic prayer. The congregation stood silently, gaze on the altar. Though struggling internally, I performed everything with the solemnity the moment required. I raised the bread and said, "Take this and eat of it, all of you." The consecration was the highlight. Mystery became real there. Heaven and earth interacted. Angels and men enjoyed a moment. Then I gripped the chalice with both hands. Red wine, Christ's blood, trembled in the candlelight. I glanced at the congregation. A sea of attentive faces and faith that I no longer had. "Drink from this, everyone. This is my blood." My heart was racing, and I felt a terrible agony in my throat without knowing why. The moment my eyes met the Virgin Mary image on my left, it happened. My left foot buckled as I approached the side altar to place the chalice for the rest of the rite. The liturgical carpet corner lifted without my notice. My ankle twisted and body gave way. Nobody had time to consider. Stumbled. The consecrated wine soared toward the Virgin Mary when the chalice fell from my hands. Dropping to my knees, the crash reverberated like thunder in the packed church. The chalice hit the stone altar without breaking. However, the wine spilled down the floor and slid under the statue. It drenched its pedestal, gently covered the flowers, and touched her marble fingers. The hush was complete. Felt like time paused. On my knees, hands on floor, breathless, heart racing. The chalice fell over, pouring its last drips. The blood Christ shed at his mother's feet. At one point, I believed everyone would boo me, rise up, and a sacristan would come in with cloths. No one moved. The Virgin Mary's face appeared over me. Her appearance changed. Unable to explain. Her eyes sparkled and her demeanor softened. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought I spotted a tear on her cheek. Too much for me. I broke down. I cried for the first time since seminary in front of everyone. My knees on the floor, wine-stained hands, sweating, red face, vulnerable. The priest leading this ceremony felt like a fallen kid crying for his mother. No one dared intervene. One of the apostolate ladies kneeled in the front row and spoke softly. "Father, she greeted you." Those words pierced my heart like a bolt of lightning. She welcomed you, as if in that fall, in that involuntary gesture, my heart had been delivered defenseless, as if in that mistake, I had finally been embraced. I remained there for a few minutes without haste. The people waited with respect, with love, with faith. I stood up carefully. I picked up the chalice and with a trembling voice, still in tears, I said, "Brothers, the blood of Christ was not shed in vain." The rest of Mass is hazy. It was irreversible, and Mary restored my faith in a mysterious, silent, and profound way. I tried to resume Mass after the fall, but it was foolish to think everything was normal. Nothing was the same in me or the church. Consecrated wine fell like a red curtain over the Virgin Mary. My liturgical instinct told me to beg for cleanup, but something stronger stopped me. That floor was sacrosanct. The congregation stood firm. No one whispered. No one glanced aside. No one disapproved. The temple was silent in reverence. At this point of Mass, the youngsters, usually restless, were still. I watched a high-haired girl rest her head on her mother's shoulder, tearful. A kneeling woman in the third row trembled as if internal pressure was applied. Even the easily distracted youth stared at the image. There was an invisible but actual airborne creature. I noticed the looks. Neither scandal nor pity were evident. Their looks showed respect, sympathy, and faith. This fall made me feel that I had become one with them. No longer an untouchable priest but a fellow human who falls, makes errors, and suffers. I continued Mass with a lump. My fingers still had wine on them as I raised the host for communion. Then I saw my hands were shaking but not my heart. As I approached the picture to perform the final rites, I noticed that the wine flowed strangely. It started as a short curving route that touched the Virgin Mary statue's feet, and expanded out like a flower. One final knelt. I said, "Thank you, Mom," without waiting. Even in my fall, you were there. When Mass ended, many people stayed kneeling. Others touched the image's base. Some left folded letters among the flowers. The confession line, which had been short, had doubled. Then something even more surprising happened. A young woman in her early 20s, with a scarf on her head and sad eyes, approached me with a small child. I learned that God observes our falls and welcomes us. I sank in my soul before you at the altar. Today I stood up. I couldn't respond, so I grasped her hand and realized the wine wasn't spilled. After leaving the church, I met a group of neighborhood youth who had left the faith. One with a shaved head and a hard look said, "I came to see the statue, but I saw a priest fall down for real and get up, not with shame but with faith. And I respect that. Maybe I'll come back next Sunday," I grinned and said. "I'll be there with my falls but my heart strong." I sat silently in the parish house that night. Not eating, not turning on the light. I just watched the wall crucifix. For the first time in months I prayed with all my heart. Lord, if you needed me to fall to return to faith, bless the stone that made me fall. I met your and your mother's eyes there. I arrived at church early the next morning. It was Monday. The hush was complete. The flowers were wilting and some candles had melted to the base. However, something seemed unchanged from the previous Massachusetts. Under the Virgin Mary picture, alcohol soiled the carpet. First, I wasn't surprised. It was wine. As I approached to tidy things up, I saw something odd. Wine hadn't dried. It was still moist, as if poured minutes earlier. Its beautiful hue and mild sweet aroma lingered on the altar. Leaning over, my fingertips touched the floor. Not just wine. There was another pink, unnamed object. I retreated silently. I stopped touching. Shortly after, the sacristan entered. I beckoned him over and said calmly, "Jacques, did you clean the altar last night?" "No, Father, I thought you would like to do it today because of the consecrated wine." "And no one touched it?" He hesitated, "But I don't know. May I tell you?" "Yes. Last night, as I went to extinguish the candles, I swear I heard someone praying aloud without seeing anyone." He pointed to the Virgin Mary and said, "A woman," a soft voice came from there. Swallowed hard. "And that perfume," he said, "is the aroma of the Lourdes processions. But we've never utilized that scent here." I bowed my thanks, my heart racing. On Tuesday, I returned to the altar with a towel to wipe the floor. As soon as the cloth touched the stone, I had a peculiar feeling as if something was telling me, "It's not time yet." I put the towel away. News spread. Despite no Mass, people returned to church. They wanted to watch where the wine fell. Some knelt, others cried quietly. After that, the testimony began. The mother of an autistic child cried and said, "Father, my son never kisses me. His eyes never meet me." Another man who hadn't been to church in decades said, "I was there on Sunday, and I swear that when the wine touched the statue, I felt such a strong presence that I knelt down. I can't pray, but I knew God hadn't forgotten me then." A catechist said she saw the sculpture glow softly at night. A little boy said he dreamed the Virgin Mary asked him to pray for tired priests. A young nurse said an old man who was dying said, "The wine has returned to Mary's feet, and the blood of Christ has returned to the world." He died with a slight smile. I called the bishop, who arrived silently with 2 archdiocese representatives. They observed, asked questions, and examined, but they reached no conclusions. Before leaving, the bishop placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "God speaks through mysteries, but what matters is that he spoke to you. Take care of this altar and your beliefs. It reappeared, and many need it. That evening, I entered the dark church and sat alone in front of the image. The moonlight shone through the stained glass windows, the wine still glistened, and my heart was at peace for the first time in a long time. Something told me. The Virgin saw me. And I finally saw her. The change did not come like a flash of lightning. It came slowly like a flower blooming in the morning sun. In the days that followed my stumbling and the spilling of wine at the Virgin's feet, something inside me fell back into place, like an old door that had been stuck for too long, finally beginning to creak and open again to the breath of God. I was still the same man with the same wrinkles, the same tiredness in my legs at the end of Mass, the same clear eyes marked by sleepless nights. But there was something new in me. Something that could not be explained, only experienced. Words regained their flavor. The gospel, which I often read out of duty, hurt me and healed me at the same time. When I said, "The Lord be with you," my chest swelled with truth. When I raised the host, my eyes filled with tears. It was as if my heart was beating in harmony with heaven again. I began to celebrate more slowly, not out of negligence toward the clock, but out of respect for the mystery. I began to look the faithful in the eyes, to listen to their prayers, their wounds. I felt that I could no longer pretend to be strong. The people needed truth, not spectacle. And the more I stripped myself, the more I was clothed. A teenage girl came to the sacristy one evening after Mass, shyly holding a blue notebook. "Father Thba, can I talk to you?" I nodded, smiling. She handed me the notebook, which contained dozens of drawings of the Virgin Mary, the altar, the wine stain, and a figure kneeling in a white cassock, eyes filled with tears. "I saw you fall, Father, and I wanted to draw what I felt." Another time, a burly tattooed man with a hard look entered the church during adoration. He was a former convict and sat in the back. At the end he said, "I hadn't been in a church for 20 years, but yesterday my daughter told me about the priest who fell. She said that if even a priest can fall, then God can accept someone like me." Each encounter was like a balm, as if the wine poured out had reached other hearts as well, not just mine. I began to dream of the Virgin again. It wasn't common, but now in silent dreams, I saw her image hovering above me, with a cloak of light covering me. She didn't speak, but she smiled. It was a mother's smile. The stumbling had not been a fall, it had been an offering. In weakness I was strengthened. In pain I was visited. In shame I was welcomed. When I look at that stain still visible on the altar, I no longer see a liturgical accident. I see the exact point where It all started quietly. A whisper among the faithful, an anonymous letter left under the altar, a message in the parish mailbox, timid, fragmented, almost whispered testimonies. But they all had one thing in common: hope, healing, reconciliation. They were miracles. I hesitated to call them miracles because miracles are rare, precious, and should not be proclaimed lightly. René, a 60-year-old man with multiple sclerosis, testified that he had dreamed that the Virgin Mary touched his feet and said, "Get up, my son." My son also fell, but he walked to the cross. I remained silent, then made the sign. A woman with a high-risk pregnancy who had lost 2 children showed me a new test and said, "The placenta is back in place." My father, the doctor, doesn't understand. She was holding a medal of Our Lady she had placed at the statue the week before. A friend dragged a young man who had attempted suicide a few months earlier to the parish one Saturday. They sat in the back. During adoration, he said, "When I saw the floor stained with wine, I felt dirty too. But then I looked at the face of the Virgin Mary, and I saw that she was looking at me like a forgiving mother. Today I want to live." I couldn't respond. On Tuesday of that week, I entered the church and found a candle lit, which was unusual for that time of day. It was a nurse from St. Joseph's Hospital's intensive care unit. I came to GI. The diocese learned. A theological group collected testimonials. Some cautioned, others saw it as a sign of comfort. I only observed. My heart understood that these miracles were not from me or my holiness, which I lack, but because Mary still walks among us. When her kids scream, she responds. I started keeping a notepad of each testimonial. I dubbed it Wine Book. It now exceeds 50 pages. There have been countless heart healings, soul wounds, and God reunions. A self-proclaimed atheist came in for curiosity. looked at the altar, touched the floor, and left quietly. He returned a few days later and said, "If she looked at me the way she looked at you, then maybe God exists." I smiled. He doesn't just exist. He awaits you. Miracles began and continue, like drops of wine on the desert of incredulity, mute signs that heaven speaks. The Archbishop noticed the rise in testimonies, faithful, and rumors outside Lyon. Monsignor Emile Roch, the bishop, called me Thursday morning. His soothing voice was grave and cautious this time. "My son, it is time to look at all this with the eyes of prudence and faith." "Yes, Your Excellency," I answered humbly. "I am available." 3 days later, Monsignor Emile and 2 Archdiocese Religious Phenomenon Commission members arrived at the church. They had sample tools, protocols, and a serious environment that sent me back to the uncertain priest I was a few weeks ago. Things changed for me this time. I didn't fear being judged since I knew my fall was merely an offering, not a spectacle. I displayed the altar. I described what happened. I detailed the fall, the faithful's reaction, the floor's fragrance, and the never-drying stain. As I did that day, I knelt and repeated what I felt in my heart. I fell, but I was lifted up by a mother's gaze. The commission checked the stain. They took photos, gathered samples with gloves and sterile tubes, and measured humidity, scent, and temperature. One of them whispered, "It's still fresh, as if it had been poured yesterday." But they all knew that almost 3 weeks had passed. I also gave them the notebook of testimonies. They read a few of them on the spot, their eyebrows arched in respectful silence. The healing of Mr. René, the dream of the pregnant woman, the embrace of the autistic child, the former prisoner who had returned to faith, the young man who had given up suicide, the atheist who now prayed. The bishop leafed through the pages slowly, and from time to time he let out a long sigh. "Father Thibouin," he said finally, "let's not rush into any statements. Churches give prudence. So is faith." He smiled at me. "What has happened here touches lives, and for that reason we must keep everything carefully. We do not yet know if this is an official miracle, but it is undoubtedly an inner miracle." He then requested me to write a detailed, personal summary of what happened. That night, my heart heavy and glad, I wrote down everything, from my emptiness to the stumble that changed everything. I handed the sealed envelope to the commission and said, "If not to acknowledge a miracle, may it at least serve as a reminder that even priests stumble, and that even in our falls Mary waits for us." Monsignor Emile looked at me, his eyes shining with emotion, and said, "My son, your fall is worth more than many sermons." He then did something unexpected. He kneeled at the altar and prayed softly, his palm on the wine stain. He stayed with me for a few minutes after the commission left quietly. "I want you to know, Father," he said, "that this is not just about verifying the phenomenon. It is much deeper than that." "What do you mean, Your Excellency?" he smiled. "It's about remembering that God still visits his people, and that sometimes he chooses the humblest way to do so." We parted with a strong embrace. That night I slept peacefully. I already knew my verdict, not because the investigation would end with a miracle decree. That could take years. Virgin was there. In addition to touching the ground, she touched my heart. She impacted many hearts, and no tube or report could measure that. The 4th Sunday after the Mass, where everything transpired, Saint Benoit Church was packed than ever. Sitting on the floor outside, Parisians, Brittoniers, and Belgian pilgrims were present. I realized it was time to speak, not as a celebrant but as a wounded man touched by grace, a son who had fallen before his mother and been lifted up with new breath. My homily was different. Not written down. Just prayed. I requested the Virgin Mary to communicate through me in the correct words and tone. I requested her help in opening my heart like a book for her children. The homily was coming, so I inhaled. I observed the congregation. Many moms with babies, elderly folks kneeling, and young people holding rosaries were attentive. I said, "My brothers, today I don't want to preach, I want to confess." Silence followed. Even kids didn't whisper. A few months ago I was empty. I celebrated Mass as if I were reciting a text I had learned. I prayed without feeling anything. I spoke of God, but I did not listen to him. I was tired to the core, and I did not even know how to admit it out loud. I paused. My voice was trembling. And then came the day of the solemn Massachusetts. The altar was decorated with flowers, The hymns were ready, and the image of Our Lady of Lourdes was among us. And I, holding the chalice, stumbled. I closed my eyes for a moment. The image came back to me with full force. The floor, the wine, the silence of the church. I fell. I spilled the consecrated wine in front of everyone, in front of the mother. And at that moment I thought I had failed as a priest. I looked at the image of the Virgin Mary on my left as I continued. But where I expected reproach, I found acceptance. Where I thought I would hear murmurs, I found silence and prayer. Where I thought I had ruined everything, God was beginning something new. A woman in the front row cried, and others knelt spontaneously. My brothers, I am a priest, but I am also a son. And that morning my mother lifted me up. With the wine she poured, she washed the dust from my heart. And today I am here. Not because I am better than you, but because I was lifted up. The people and I cried. Some closed their eyes and touched the floor. Others placed notes, photos, and devotional items on the altar. I said, don't wait for big signs. Mary acts in silence, in stumbling, in alarm, in the stain that does not dry. She acts when you think everything is over, because she is a mother, and a mother never abandons her children. I drew the cross. The assemblage was hushed, and I felt that the altar and people were one. We were one body, one pain, one faith, led by Mary. Walking alone in the empty church that night, I kneeled before the image again. I muttered, thank you for letting me fall, because that is how I learned to be lifted up by you. While the vivid, damp stain still smelled of blood and wine, the archdiocese has not removed the stain on the altar, and even after months, it remains damp and slightly fragrant, as if the wine had never soiled it. Veiled women walk hand in hand with their children. Silent men hold their rosaries with hope. A flame that I thought was extinguished now burns with a quiet strength, warming, sustaining, and accompanying others in their dark night. My parish has become a place of pilgrimage. Hundreds of people come every week. Some seek healings, others come in silence. Many simply come to see the Virgin and the floor where a priest fell. I asked the bishop for a new mission because the parish needed me, but when he saw me with a determined look and a peaceful heart, he smiled and blessed me. Where are you going, Father Thiba? He asked. I replied, where there are weary souls, where there are silent priests, where faith needs hands that have already fallen and learned to get up again. I will soon leave for a small parish in northern France. See. My last Mass at Saint Benoit was read from a letter I printed, folded, and placed on each pew. To those who saw me fall and helped me get up, I say with a peaceful heart, if one day you stumble, remember the altar, the stain that never dries, the wine that became perfume, and the mother who welcomes even before we ask. Not all falls are punishments. These are invitations. Invitations to remake as I have and you will. I kneel one more time before Our Lady of Lourdes and whisper, hot tears flowing down my cheeks. Mom, this time I'm rising up by choice, no longer because I stumbled, but because I've been healed. In the comments, write, it lifted me up. Let's fill this page with messages of gratitude to the Virgin Mary. Have you ever experienced something you can't explain that rekindled your faith? Share your testimony. Could heal someone. And if you believe the Mother visits us even in silence, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those you love. Faith is like consecrated wine.